Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the May 2022 meeting of Triangle Association of Freelancers. My name is Don Vaughn, and our guest this evening is Michael Eury, editor of RetroFan and Back Issue magazines published by Raleigh-based TwoMorrows Publishing. I asked Michael to join us this evening because of his role in publishing and editing niche publications, very specific magazines toward a very specific audience. It's an opportunity for a lot of freelance writers. They often don't think along those lines, though, so I wanted to talk with Michael about the value of niche publishing, especially for beginning writers. Michael, thank you for joining us tonight.
Oh, you're welcome, Don. Thank you for having me.
Let me hold up your magazines real quick, just a little bit. In addition to editing RetroFan and Back Issue magazines, here's the latest issue of RetroFan with Sergio Aragones on the cover. Michael has also written several books for TwoMorrows Publishing, including the Batcave Companion, the Krypton Companion, the Justice League Companion.
There's a theme there, isn't
there? A little
there?
bit, yeah. And a biography of Dick Giordano. So there is the theme, though, is that those all cover our DC Comics titles and artists. And so tell us a little bit. That actually brings me to my first question, Michael. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about your professional journey as a writer. You were an editor at DC, at Comico, at Dark Horse, but tell us a little bit about the journey to those opportunities and also what brought you to TwoMorrows and your connection with John Morrow.
Oh, wow. And we have how many hours for me to do that?
Actually, we've got two. So.
Well, Batman was sort of an inspiration for me to get into comics, and I wanted to create. I was 8 years old, barely 8, in January of 1966 when the Adam West Batman television show came on. And that I was the perfect target audience for it, sucked me into this world. And so I had a couple of flirtations with leaving comics as a reader, but quickly went right back. And so I was looking for ways to contribute and produce my own comics. I was writing and drawing my own comic books in junior high and high school. They were very primitive. They starred my classmates as superheroes, super redneck. This is the 70s, right? Yeah, and it was the South. Let's see, Weasel Man. One of my classmates had a very long neck, and everybody said, you look like a weasel. So I make him Weasel Man, who could elongate his neck, and I just did a lot of rip-offs of Elongated Man from the comics. He was in Justice League at that point, so easy for me to copy a Dick Dillon, drawing of Elongated Man and his head and neck, going everywhere. But my uncle was a newspaper writer and editor, and I was used to seeing a familial byline in town. This would be Concord, North Carolina, my hometown. And he would occasionally see that I had this budding interest in, I guess, the periphery of journalism, being comics, would sometimes take me down to the newspaper office, and I would get to see, galleys and such, and see the printing press. And so I kind of got a tutorial as a teenager. Then I went off and got a degree in music education, though, because I really just didn't know how to pursue my passion for comics, because I was a kid from Concord, North Carolina. What are you going to do? How do you get into comics? Everything was headquartered in New York City, which could have been Mars when you're a kid from, Concord. And so I briefly taught band, hated it. I have tremendous respect for teaching and teachers, but I should have listened to the little voice earlier that told me that really was not the right fit for me to pursue my passion, because it was several years after college that I started to try to find my way in. So by this time, we're talking the mid 80s. And I was writing anything I could write. I mean, I was typing back then because, you know, computers, they were what? Refrigerator size and in science labs, right? The UNIVAC. And I was typing articles. I finally made some headway with local newspapers and getting just a fluff piece published here and there in the mid 80s. And, you know, paid anything. I mean, I paid hardly anything, but still you get a byline. By the time I was in the mid 80s, I was a newlywed. I was determined to get a job at DC Comics. My wife and I, in 1986, on April Fool's Day, loaded up a small U-Haul with my comic books, a waterbed, a television. Again, it's 1986, a waterbed of all things. And she drove our car, and I drove the U-Haul, and we headed north with the goal of me finding a job at DC. And we were going to temporarily stay at some friends of mine from ECU who were then in grad school at the University of Delaware. So we landed in Newark, Delaware, a suburb of Wilmington. And I ended up briefly working at a video store while finding my way into comics. And I did so through a publication called Amazing Heroes. Amazing Heroes was published by Fantagraphics. It was sort of, this is the pre-internet era. It was the news source for comic books and also for comics history. So the magazine published not only retrospectives of previously published comics, but news items about upcoming comics, and I wrote both. And I really started to hone my chops as a writer at that point. But what the good thing was, we did preview editions that gave me contacts to the editors in New York. And so I had a love of Superman and Batman, as evidenced by those books you were flashing earlier. And, you know, got the phone numbers of Denny O'Neil, who was editing and sometimes writing Batman at that point. Mike Carlin, who was editing Superman. And, you know, I was writing preview pieces about their books for Amazing Heroes. And essentially then I would call Jerry Ordway, who was drawing Superman, and Marv Wolfman, who was writing Teen Titans and writing Superman. And so I started to form relationships with these people. And so by that point, we're looking at 1987. And I really needed to take the next step. And I simultaneously applied for 2 editorial positions that were open. One at Comico, which was nearby to me. And I was in Delaware, as I said. Comico was in Norristown, Pennsylvania, all in the Delaware Valley there, the Philadelphia metro area. And I also applied at DC Comics. And I instantly got a call back from Diana Schutz, who is the editor-in-chief at Comico, one of the best editors in the business. And she knows grammar and forwards and backwards. I learned so much from her. Scared the heck out of me at the beginning too. But she said, I just lost my assistant editor. You have no typos or grammatical errors in your cover letter. Would you like to come in for an interview? I did. And she wanted to hire me. And somebody had just gotten hired at DC. And I was sort of in the editorial queue for an upcoming job. So I spent 1.5 years at Comico. Learned a lot from Diana. I got to work with all kinds of people there. Mike W. Barr on the Maze Agency, which was a detective series. Adam Hughes was his artist, so I helped, you know, discover Adam Hughes. He was this sweaty, palmed kid who literally, sweated all over his samples, but those samples were amazing. You could tell at that early embryonic age that he had great talent. I got to work with Bill Willingham on the Elementals. Let's see, I did stuff like, Gumby Diana had edited a Gumby Summer Fun special that was written by Bob Burton of Flaming Carrot fame and drawn by Arthur Adams. They did a sequel written by Steve Purcell of Salmon Max Freelance Police fame, also drawn by Arthur Adams. I edited that, laughed my rear off. It was so funny, so much fun. And worked with, on a couple of different projects. Steve Rude, got to know Dave Stevens. All these wonderful, talented people were at this little tiny comic company because Comico let them do all kinds of stuff that, nurtured their taste and their aesthetics, rather than force them to a certain, corporate, flavor. So, but then I still really wanted to work at DC and got my chance in mid-'89 and went there. And for better or for worse, I had my dream job, and 8 months into my job, I got promoted to work with Dick Giordano. You showed the biography of him, and Dick hired me to be his assistant. I should have known that I was going to be in an environment that was a little difficult for me as a kid from North Carolina. And I like to say that I was a bit too Mayberry for Manhattan. One thing I was not prepared for working on staff at DC Comics was, I don't want to call it a hostile environment. It was New York. If you are a New Yorker, you have to be brusque. You see, if you visited, or maybe somebody here tonight is a former New Yorker or has worked there, but when you're one of 8 million, you got to kind of have a force field around you, get out of my face, that kind of stuff. But I was like, I wasn't quite that, Gomer Pyle-ish, but still I smiled. I literally had a coworker ask me one time, I can't figure you out. What do you mean? Well, you're always smiling. What's your angle? He really asked me, what's your angle? I said, I'm smiling because I'm happy. I just really had a hard time adjusting to that. And over the course of several years, no matter how much I loved what I was doing, and the fact that I was kind of in the inner circle for a while in management, it just was, it was a little too much. I just couldn't take the weight of the corporate lifestyle and the grueling aspect of just commuting in and out of New York. When you and I were commenting earlier, talking earlier in private, I work from home. I've worked from home for years. I just walk across the house to go to work. It's tough on people who, get like Dick Giordano, my boss. He lived in upstate. No, he lived in Connecticut, excuse me. So he had like an hour and 20 minutes on a train one way just to get to work. And then you go through the full day of work, and then you go home, and then, you go home and have dinner at, 8:30, 9 p.m., go to bed, get up and repeat. And it's just a grueling process. And I'm a little more still of the kind of the Mayberry mindset. It's just my North Carolina roots. I don't sit around the barbershop all day with Floyd and playing checkers. But my pace was a little slower. And then I had hearing loss, progressive hearing loss that was on adult onset, that was starting to manifest itself there in my last days at DC, which were really just making it difficult for me. So I ultimately left that, my dream job, and was a freelance writer. I wrote for Marvel. I did something that's kind of embarrassing. I followed John Bern, the writer and artist on She-Hulk. And I wasn't quite prepared to take on a series of that magnitude, but I did. And it has some good things and has some bad things. It was a great learning experience. But when you're learning on a big Marvel book after following a superstar, that was a difficult period, but an interesting one. And then I ended up at Dark Horse Comics, who they had shown some interest in me when I was at DC. And so my wife and I moved out to Portland, Oregon. And so by 93, I was starting at Dark Horse, and quickly got promoted to be a group editor there, overseeing a line of comics and a brand. And there were different groups of titles at Dark Horse. Some of them were creator-owned, some were licensed at the time, Star Wars, Alien, Predator, and others were, I said, creator-owned, licensed, and company-owned. So I was working on those initially. The Mask, Barbed Wire, that they made that into a movie, and a number of properties like that. Since I was the superhero guy from DC, they thought it was logical for me to do the superhero books there. And so I was there for several years, so the mid to late 90s, and there's some of the same issues I had with the hearing. I denied my hearing loss for the longest time and let it sour me, and it adversely affected my career. I was missing cues. I had one of my junior editors at one time said, some of the guys, think you're aloof, and they thought I was snubbing them. Well, I wasn't hearing them, They literally would ask me a question from behind, wouldn't hear it, and I just walked right past. And or sometimes if my head was down and I was reading at my desk and somebody would come in and kind of mumble. And Oregon was also notorious for low talkers. It was really kind of a weird cultural thing. If you ever saw that great Seinfeld episode, the puffy shirt episode, Jerry gets into wearing the puffy shirt on a TV show because he was asked a question that he couldn't hear. And he was basically asked by a low talker to wear this shirt, this horrible shirt on TV, and he did. But so I've used the word low talker ever since that. But a lot of people in Oregon kind of talk low, and I couldn't hear them. And sometimes people will be talking to me, I didn't even know it. And so I would miss verbal cues. And I just was not mature enough at that point to really full on address my hearing loss. And it kind of pushed me out of that job as well. I just got overburdened by it and just kind of went off and crawled into a hole for a while until I figured out how to get out. And John Morrow was kind enough to kind of give me a pathway. Is essentially a mutual friend and collaborator, Tom Stewart, was a fan of a toy that I had a passion for, and I was in an internet group for Captain Action, the original superhero action figure. And I had written a book on Captain Action. I was actually doing a job as a communications director for a small business in Oregon. This is after I left Dark Horse's staff, and I had sort of wafted out of comics. I tried to get into animation writing because I was writing a lot of in the late 90s. I was still writing comics, but it was cartoon stuff. I love cartoons. I was writing Pinky and the Brain, Looney Tunes, lots of Looney Tunes stories. I used to read my scripts aloud with the window open. Neighbor walked by and I'm like, "Fluffer and Fluckatash," and they're thinking like, "What? That guy is insane." But you want to make sure the dialogue flows, and when you're writing cartoon characters, you do the same thing. But that work started to dry up. I really wanted to segue into animation. I wrote some spec scripts. Had a friend who read some spec scripts. I went down to LA, pitched a show, came that close. Six Pack. It was about a trailer park in North Carolina where 6 people get superpowers. This was the South Park era of television before Marvel Studios. There wasn't a whole lot of superhero stuff, but they get really bizarre superpowers, like an ex-go-go girl who's now an old lady on a walker gets super speed. So, she's like, real fast. And there's, some funny stuff that some of it was, it definitely was in the vein of South Park, but I met with a couple of producers and we came close. But then my wife says, I really don't want to live in LA. Let's not do this, please. And I said, well, I really don't either. And I was at that point, well in my 30s, pushing 40, and really kind of too old to start a career like that too. So just kind of got out of it and, depressed about my hearing loss. And then I wrote this Captain Action book though, and its publisher couldn't publish it. Tom Stewart, to go back to him, says you should try John Morrow. And John's business at that point was relatively new. He was doing the Kirby Collector, the great magazine that salutes Jack Kirby and explores his career, still going strong. And so I contacted John, asked him if he was interested in this book, and he said yes. And then that led to the Giordano book. And then John says, I want to start this new magazine called Back Issue. Would you like to edit it? Sure. And then all of a sudden, I'm kind of back in the industry again. And we're out of time now. So thank you all for being here tonight.
Well, you did cover a lot of territory, Michael.
Yeah.
And I actually thank you for that. Tell us a little bit about your responsibilities as the editor of RetroFan and Back Issue. What is your day to day?
It varies. I mean, I work every single day, and I don't work a traditional 8-hour day. I work when I need to work. And that's one of the luxuries of having a home-based business. I meet my deadlines, and unless there is an extraordinary, compelling circumstance, every now and then something happens, like a pandemic that might, slow things down. But nonetheless, I learned over the years to take deadlines seriously, and so essentially my schedule is, I know that an issue is due to the publisher on a given date. And so RetroFan is bi-monthly. Back Issue is published 8 times a year. So I literally have RetroFan's editorial schedule on a, it's a 2-month cycle, and there's always a couple of issues that overlap in different, stages of production. Back Issue being 8 times a year, I have it on a 6-week schedule. So once every 6 weeks, we're turning in an issue. And at this point, I mean, issue 135 of Back Issue is about to come out. So right now, issue 138 just finished being proofread. It's off to the printer. 139 is being designed. I just finished editing the manuscripts for and writing captions for 140. It's in the queue waiting for the designer to finish his 6-week window, and it's just a machine. And my designer lives in Washington State. I live in New Bern, North Carolina. So we're 3,000 miles apart, but we don't need to be in the same room. John lives in Raleigh. And so my RetroFan designer lives in Southern California. So it's rare that have a face-to-face with people. It's literally usually by email, and every now and then a phone conversation. But we've just got this machine that works really nicely, and issues just keep coming out, and I'm blessed and happy to be able to do this kind of work.
Well, Back Issue, for those who are unfamiliar, covers comic books in what's known as the Bronze Age, which is 1970 through around 85-ish, thereabouts. And RetroFan covers all aspects of popular culture from the 60s, 70s, and 80s into the 50s, actually. And it's a broad area. Michael, tell us how you fill issues, how you decide themes, how you make assignments. Is John involved in determining content, or does he leave that entirely up to you? How an issue comes up, how do you decide what's going to go in it?
I'm involved in ruining his plans for content more than
Well, I think that he is joking. It's rare that John interferes. He really gives me carte blanche, and I appreciate that. And Neil Adams passed away recently, and I, with Back Issue, have traditionally not done issues devoted to creators because the name of the magazine is Back Issue. And TwoMorrows also publishes a magazine called Comic Book Creator, and has published many different biographies about comic book people. So my preference has been to keep Back Issue anchored with an exploration of the comic books. However, Neil Adams is a pretty darn big deal. Neil, he didn't necessarily single-handedly revolutionize the comics art form in the late 60s and through the early 70s, but boy, if anybody came close. It really was him.
Yeah.
From the darkening of Batman, helping Batman return to his Gothic roots, to advertising. I mean, Neil basically took comic book storytelling and kind of converted that into a whole industry of using that for ads. And so, and just a photorealistic artist that just drew comics in an inventive and fun and beautiful way. So we are doing an issue. John asked me to do an issue devoted to Neil, and I was happy to do it. It took just a little bit of insertion, because John will tell you that I joked with him a while back, said I could die, be dead for a year and a half, and nobody would know, because I work so far in advance that, you know, there's material in the pipeline. And so I know what's going to be in Back Issue. I planned through most of 2023, and most of the covers are designed. And I think this is still only 2022, isn't it? So yeah, I do plan ahead. And so, but John pretty much lets me run with this. And sometimes if I'm unsure of, you know, cover A or cover B, what do you think is going to be more commercial with your readership? I will ask him, and he'll give me his 2 cents worth. And we work really well together. And he is a non-intrusive boss, and I really like that. Thank you, man.
Well, okay, and that's only because I have been blessed to have editors on most of our magazines who are very seasoned professionals to begin with before they showed up on our doorstep. So Michael had such great experience. And when he showed up with this Captain Action book, I was like, okay, sure. And after the process of working on that with him, it went so smoothly. And what he delivered was just so clean.
Thank you.
And my wife did the graphic design on that book. And she even was, and she's not a comics aficionado or action figure knowledge particularly, but she was able to follow what he presented very, very well and work on the design on that without, I mean, he is so thorough in the material he supplies. You don't have to do a lot of editing to it. You don't have to do a lot of work with it. And it just makes for a very, he's so professional. You know, he talked about not missing deadlines. What issue 135, right? Hopefully we'll be here this week. Never missed a deadline in 135 issues. And that's not just Michael not missing a deadline. That's Michael making sure the 8 contributors who write articles for each issue don't miss their deadlines either for 135 issues. You know, and this isn't, you know, we're not some big, this isn't Time Magazine with giant offices in New York and people on staff. These are all freelance writers working under Michael, basically. And he is the good boss here. He makes it so easy for me.
That actually brings me to my next question, though. With RetroFan, you've got regular contributors who are essentially columnists who write specifically on particular topics, but you also have a lot of chunks in the book that are written by general contributors like myself. Back Issue, I think, is unique in that you come up with a general theme, some general ideas, and then you throw it out to your contributors to pitch on that particular theme. Why does that work for you, Michael? What, you know, the kind of different ways here. Why do you approach Back Issue that way and RetroFan the way you do?
Well, it really goes back to the development of the very first issue of Back Issue. And next year we celebrate our 20th anniversary. It's wow. Wow, how, you know, fortunate are we, John, to have this magazine still in print and doing well. Our numbers are relatively consistent. And so we've got a loyal readership, and sometimes they'll spike up if we do something that's, you know, a little more commercial. Putting Batman on the cover often helps. Yeah, but from the get-go, I just thought that we needed some type of thematic structure for 2 reasons. For one, it defines an issue. It gives you an editorial framework. So the very first issue was DC versus Marvel, and it had the late George Perez. It was a Captain America versus Batman cover. And the only time we've ever been able to mix DC and Marvel characters together, because there's enmity there between the two publishers. But at that time, they were publishing a JLA Avengers crossover that was really kind of a picking up the torch of a dormant project from the 80s, but one that withered on the vine a long time ago. And so we were able to sort of capitalize on that and start with that. But DC versus Marvel, the second issue was 80s, the big 80s issue. The third issue was No Laughing Matters, and it's was humor with a Joker cover. And the fourth issue was a Marvel issue. And it's surprising to me that I'm going back 20 years and just spouting this off. That's my superpower. Boy, that's kind of scary, isn't it? Everybody's like getting out there now, click, 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 let's get away from this guy. It might be contagious, but no, seriously, it gives me editorial structure. And, you know, it also has kept me interested. I almost didn't want to say that. I think if it were just a generic grab bag of contents, you know, month in and month out, I'm not sure we would have been able to sustain it. There's something about that editorial structure through the theme that just unifies the contents, and they're not necessarily all of the same company, all of the same year. You know, like a superhero romance, we did that a couple of years ago, and that covered from weddings to like Spider-Man's or Peter Parker's Aunt May almost marrying Spider-Man's enemy, Dr. Octopus, all this weird stuff like that. I've just been immersed in the comics and its history long enough, and I know which websites to go to where I can view an view of an entire month's worth of publications from every publisher, month to month, through the entire timeline of comics. So sometimes I will literally just go, okay, there's January 1975, February 1975, and sometimes, oh, wait a minute, you know, let's not forget this. Every now and then I will find something I never heard of before. We need to do an article on this just by fishing. And
you do a lot of the writing yourself. I mean, you write the occasional article, but I want to clarify that the magazines are almost entirely freelance written, that your writers, your contributors are all freelance. They're not TwoMorrows employees as you are as the editor. That's correct?
Well, that's correct. That's correct. I mean, and technically, I'm a freelance editor as well. So
that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you like to be pitched, though, Michael? I mean, I'm trying to remember. I've been a fan of the publications for a long time, and the first article I wrote for you was about Mad Magazine in the 70s, I think, for Back Issue.
Yeah. Okay. You're right. Yeah.
I'm trying to remember how I connected with you and made that sale. But how do you want to be approached by writers such as those in TAF who might have some ideas of interest to you? What's the best way to catch your eye?
Well, a really, pithy pitch, a subject line in an email that really makes me want to open it up and read it. Some of it is literally just the stuff that we've all been taught, the stuff that we've read in virtually every writer's book. Editors have a lot on their plates. As we're discussing this, if there's say 8 to 10 different articles in an issue of Back Issue, that means that's that many people I'm working with on that issue. But again, several issues are in the work simultaneously, and so while I am maybe fielding a query for this issue, I'm working with the designer on that one while I'm searching for art for another one. So it's juggling it. One of the wonderful byproducts now, I say, as a 64-year-old guy, is my cognitive abilities are so sharp at a time when sometimes at this age they start to fade. I don't need one of those pharmaceuticals I see advertised on TV constantly for this. Just doing this playing Scrabble with my wife, doing crossword puzzles and such. It's really keeping me sharp. And I'm able to, if you pitch an idea to me, it's got to be something you really want to do. I have some people that sometimes have sent me pitches where it's just kind of obvious that they just want to write something. Part of this entire discussion tonight is about niche publishing. So you really got to have a passion for it. I mean, I have a passion for this. And as John said, his editors are seasoned from elsewhere. Roy Thomas at its Alter Ego magazine. Well, Roy Thomas, was the writer of so many comics, and he still does. And what is he, like 180 years old now?
I think he's actually 81, I believe.
81, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
He was editor-in-chief of Marvel in the 70s.
He was, I mean,
Stan Lee, so.
And it is a 64-year-old man. I mean, I read his stuff when I was a kid, and he's still going strong. And yet another person that, is like quietly and tacitly, at least by example, a mentor. You're never too old to learn from other people. But as far as pitching ideas is concerned, you got to know what you're talking about. And every now and then, a couple of times I've stumbled because I love bringing in new voices. Even with RetroFan, as you said earlier, there are 6 regular RetroFan columnists. So what that means, of course, is the real estate, so to speak, is in demand, because there just aren't that many available pages for freelancers. But I like the columnists because they each have their voices and their realms of expertise from animation. I mean, there's several Emmy winners who are contributing to this magazine, RetroFan, but and they have their worlds. I have to make sure that they don't play the same note too many times, But I also want to bring in as many different people as I can. I currently have notes for several years worth of material for RetroFan. I say that tonight not to dissuade anybody, because if somebody has a concept they want to email me about and talk to me about that I think is a good fit, I will eventually work it in. But whenever I start to have that discussion with somebody, which is usually by email, the only thing I do is just say, please have patience, because it will take a while usually. However, the thematic structure of Back Issue sort of locks me into a theme, which means that I can't, mix and match parts that easily. I have to kind of stick with that. Whereas RetroFan, I was determined when we started that almost 4 years ago now, to do the opposite. So conversely, there is no theme. Every now and then, the Halloween released issue might have a couple of horror features in it. That's the closest to a theme that we really do. You might see a Christmas, like a Rankin Bass, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, or Santa Claus Conquers the Martians article at the end of the year. But again, that's not really a theme. That's just tying into a holiday. And so I do not want a theme in RetroFan. I really like the grab bag. I was a little nervous at first at the eclectic nature, because, here's the current issue, number 20. Mad Magazine cartoonist Sergio Aragones. G.I. Joe history. Mo Howard of the Three Stooges, his last years. The Lone Ranger in animation. B.J. Thomas, raindrops keep falling on
his last interview.
Head. It was his last interview. And Route 66, and an accompanying interview with George Maharis, who was in his 90s, one of the stars of Route 66. And a great article by our designer, contest you wanted to win but didn't. A bizarre thing is out of nowhere that ended up kind of being like the sleeper hit of the issue. People wrote and said, I didn't know what to expect of this, but it was hilarious. And it reminded me of all this time I wasted as a kid.
And your article about hot pants. Let's not forget your article about hot pants.
Thank you. And luckily that you're only seeing me from because I'm wearing them right now. I like them so much.
Michael, you had mentioned
go-go boots.
I mentioned kind of like you work in advance, but you also have the opportunity, at least with RetroFan, to drop in an article if something kind of falls in your lap. I think an example of that might be the first piece I wrote for you for RetroFan, which is about the Monster Times. And that assignment almost happened as kind of a serendipitous email exchange that you and I had, and I mentioned something and you're like, oh yeah, I want to do that, and I'm like, I'll write it, and you're like, okay, and then I have an assignment, and then
So
but you actually ran it pretty soon after I delivered it. So I mentioned that only because I don't want people to think that if they pick something to you, and you get assigned, that it's not going to show up for 5 years. That is not quite that strict, but yeah.
It should be somewhere in between. It really just depends upon what the needs of the issue are at that time. And sometimes, even though, as I said, I don't like to have a theme in RetroFan, I am not opposed to, and I even enjoy having, say, something compatible. And so, that was a Halloween. No, it wasn't. No, that was your Monster Times is the Barbara Eden cover feature, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yes, it was.
Which, and I really like that. I mean, ideally, I would like to see RetroFan have, a monster piece, a celebrity piece, and that's kind of how I approached it initially, an animation piece, a toy piece, and still that often is the case, but sometimes, it's just that this is what my regular columnists are bringing to me, that issue. Sometimes if they might say, I want to do a piece on, this TV show. And I would tell them, well, we just did a Western, if it's a Western, like 2 issues ago. Let's table that one for a while and do something else now. And so we have that give and take with I have that give and take with the columnists, but sometimes as far as the freelance material that runs in RetroFan is concerned, it will be predicated on what my needs are for that issue. With Barbara Eden, I Dream of Jeannie on the cover, Monster Times, that's about as far away as Barbara Eden than you can get, but it just, it kept it eclectic. And as I was mentioning earlier, and I think I digressed from the finishing my statement, it was, I was a little nervous initially about having content set all over the place, because, would the readers connect with this, or do they want like an all Three Stooges issue? Do they want an all Lone Ranger issue? And, when you do that, when you're that narrow, it's a crapshoot. Are there enough fans out there that really are going to appreciate that? And are you going to, by catering to the Three Stooges fans, lose your toy fans and your monster fans and your celebrity fans other than Three Stooges for that issue? And so that's why I just, decided, and John gave me his blessings as the publisher to just throw all this different stuff out there.
The eclectic nature of the magazine actually makes RetroFan one of my favorite publications to read. I enjoy it tremendously. And I wanted to talk now about niche publishing. You edit too, you're a freelancer as well. These are small publications, very narrowly focused, very specific readerships, paying market, but not a hugely paying market. Knowing that, Michael, why would you encourage writers, especially beginning writers, to consider writing for niche publications such as Back Issue and RetroFan if they've got that background, but niche publications in general? What's the value to beginning writers?
The value for beginning writers is to get credit and another credit on their resume. That's one thing for a beginner, but it's work. I mean, as you know, and everybody here tonight knows, as writers, you have to write, and the only way to write is to write. I mean, you have to do the craft. There's so many people that, and I've got a folder of all these great ideas for novels and stories that eventually I'm hopefully going to get around to, but that takes a lot of time, and I invest a lot of my time into my editing and the articles that I do for the magazine. So every now and then I get over here and I sit down and I start to do fiction, but that's a whole different mindset for me. I don't know, and I'd be curious to hear anybody who's with us tonight, if anybody who is seasoned at writing both fiction and nonfiction, and how easy it is for you to swap those hats, because some of the mechanics are the same. Maybe even your voice, the way you convey the material, could be very similar, but they're two wholly different worlds. But again, there are parallels. You're still telling a story, whether it's one you're creating from whole cloth or one you're finding an inventive way to retell or present for your readers.
I'd like to go to, well, I want to, before we go to audience questions, we had talked earlier and you had mentioned, Michael, your hearing loss and how it's affected your life. You mentioned how it affected your career, not being able to hear people thinking you're aloof and whatnot. How did you overcome that? And how did it benefit you professionally once you were able to kind of come to terms with what was going on and move forward?
Well, pardon me if I tear up when I tell the story, but I was saved by Superman. I lived in, statistics will tell you that people go through a minimum of an average of 7 years of denial about their hearing loss. It's usually for people, unless it's you have a dramatic event, say someone in the military exposed to a loud explosion that could rob you of most of your hearing, or Meniere's disease or some other affliction. Sometimes has been known to, people have they've woken up deaf or almost totally devoid of hearing. But for most of us, it's sort of like a Looney Tunes cartoon when Wile E. Coyote goes over the cliff and he kind of lingers there and he looks down and he knows where he's going to be falling, and then it's just like this, and then finally the poof. And so, it just happened slowly. I knew it was going on, but it was, la, 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 I'm going to keep moving forward. I don't want to be some old guy. I was in my 30s, for heaven's sake. My dream job there in Manhattan, in a big high rise, a big deluxe apartment in the sky. And my hearing starts to go, and it just made life challenging for me, but I did not take the plunge and really go to the audiologist and seek treatment. And so I'm kind of in this fringe, and I finally ended up at Dark Horse getting one hearing aid in my right ear, and it helped. But I was still missing things, and I was literally kind of living a half-life for years, like through the mid-90s, through about 2004. Even when I was starting with Back Issue, I was still kind of on the edge. And I had 2 hearing aids at that point, but really was kind of everything at arm's length. And then, I witnessed Christopher Reeve's miraculous life. As you're aware, it was 1985 when Christopher Reeve had was it? No, excuse me, 95. Excuse me, I'm a decade off. Pardon me. Because he did Superman 4 in 1987. That was released then. So 1995, horseback riding accident. The worst possible thing happens. The horse just stops right before a hurdle. Reeve is thrown over the horse, lands back here, shatters the spine, wakes up from a coma, can't even breathe without a respirator. Asks his family to pull the plug. I do not want to live this way. This is no life. And they convinced him, you're still you, which is Still Me was the name of his autobiography. Wonderful story. I read that. I was moved by it. I started to watch him in that wheelchair over the years, advocate for people with hearing loss. But I still wasn't fully engaged until he died. And literally, I was working with the Christopher Reeve Foundation. I'd contact them. I was this close to arranging an interview with Chris Reeve for Back Issue. This is long before RetroFan. I lived in Portland, Oregon. I was going to fly out to his place on the East Coast on my own dime and interview Christopher Reeve about playing Superman and about the challenges that he was experiencing and how he was overcoming them. Then I get this in October, early October of 2004, an email on a Friday says, we just can't do this right now. And, you know, I'm sorry to hear that, and I'll follow up again another time. That Sunday, I turn on CNN that morning. Superman actor Christopher Reeve died. You know, I cried. It really touched me personally, and I really feel, and I'm going to get spiritual here for a minute, but I really feel that on his way out, he just kind of went like, you know, and flew off. And on that day, I stopped being depressed about my hearing loss. I stopped denying it, and I stopped going, why me? Why is this happening to me? Because I had that feeling, you know, what is this? You know, this made it difficult for me to do my dream job. And finally, Superman sent me that message. So I stopped saying, why me? And I just said, what do I do next? And then all of a sudden, things became clear. And I went to a meeting of the Hearing Loss Association, which is an advocacy group, a self-help group. I learned that my hearing was a heck of a lot better than a lot of people out there who were navigating the world, and just got my confidence back because I can communicate. I ended up being a speaker, a chapter leader, gotten a couple of awards. I was even on the cover of Hearing Loss magazine because I wrote an article, and I literally was ripping my shirt open and had the hearing loss logo on my shirt. And it was called How My Hearing Loss Made Me a Superhero. But that was a journey that I had to go through, and it took years. And it did adversely affect my career. But I will say I allowed it to. And, you know, we live in an era now where I'm hearing you fine. Why? My hearing aids and, you know, my phone, Bluetooth connectivity. I'm hearing you in both ears, like most people are now anyway, with the, you know, earbuds or whatever. But, you know, I wear earbuds every waking hour of the day, so to speak, with my hearing aids. Technology just keeps getting better and better. And I can't imagine what it was like decades ago to have a profound hearing loss and to hold that cone up, you know, whatever. And, but so it did affect me, but I feel this way about any disability. And through my advocacy with people with hearing loss, I've met other people. I've met people who are blind, almost deaf, and in a wheelchair. I'm thinking like, wow. You know, I'm thinking, you know, God bless you. You got really dealt a triple whammy, but they're just cheerful and they're going about their way. And I'm thinking, man, if they can do that, I don't have anything to complain about. And so, you know, we all have challenges, and something's going to, you know, slow us down and throw us a curve, but it's only going to be a disability if you allow yourself to be disabled by it. I'm not saying it's not going to be a challenge. I have this is an easier environment for me than a crowded room, because multiple voices are harder for me to you know, register, and sometimes it takes me a split second to have it kind of filter through the system, so to speak. You know, when I'm juggling all these different sounds, and yeah, you have to work a little harder.
That is a really inspiring story,
well, thank you.
Michael. It really is.
Thank you.
I'd like to open it up to our audience for questions. Some people might have an idea to throw at you, if you wouldn't mind, you know, just kind of, you know, hearing some ideas. Michael, I want to introduce you to Mark Cantrell. Mark and I are friends for a million years. He and I have collaborated on a number of projects, and he and I were talking, and I mentioned this specifically, so that he has something that I thought would really right up your alley, and that is an article about artist Bill Campbell. And Mark, I'll let you explain that very quickly to Michael.
Excuse me. Muted too early. Hi. I became friends with Bill when I was writing a few articles about the weirdos from the 1960s, the weirdos models. And we started sending correspondence back and forth. And completely unprompted, he started sending me original artwork.
Oh my.
And I said, Bill, I can't accept this. And he goes, oh, no, it's fine. You know, go ahead and hang on to it. So I got so much of this stuff, I began to think I'd like someone else to see it besides just me. So I wrote a series of articles for various publications about it, and actually ended up writing a book about him called A Weirdo World, The Art of Bill Campbell with Schiffer Books, which actually has done very well. I was kind of surprised. I wrote it because I wanted to read a book about him, and there wasn't one. And I said, well, I guess it's up to me, you know. But when talking to Don, he thought that that might be something that would be interesting for RetroFan, because there are a lot of people my age who, actually everybody I knew in junior high school was building Weirdos models. So that might be something, you know, that would be good for the magazine. Excuse me. I don't know what's going on here, but I have a lot of original art with which to illustrate, you know, an article if you were interested in that.
I would be, and the era is perfect for RetroFan, and we recently have flirted with similar things with wacky packages. That's connecting. The person who wrote that article had actually connected with some of the artists who had drawn some of the wacky package art for Tops. And but weirdos are so fun, and that is part of that 60s bizarro culture. We actually did. We've done 2 artist interviews now. The most recent issue again is, and I even cover featured Sergio Aragones, and that one was a little riskier because I like including this stuff in RetroFan, but RetroFan is still a general readers magazine, but I say kind of sort of because you got to be it's not a fluff publication. You know, it's there's nostalgia there, but it's nostalgia there for people who really want to dig a little deeper.
It's a deep dive into each subject.
Yes,
it really
absolutely.
Is.
Even if it's a short article that is brief, it still really needs to be concise and just has as much meat to it as possible. But not long ago, we did an article with Will Murray, one of my regular columnists, interviewed James Bama, who, of course, he just passed not long ago. So, one of the bittersweet things of being an editor for this kind of material now for 20 years. I've published the last interviews with a handful of people now, and it's rewarding, but it's sobering as well. But James Bama was 97, and so for me, as I'm dealing with my 94, almost 95-year-old father-in-law now, and so I've got firsthand experience with elderly people. They so appreciate the fact that somebody still remembers and cares, and I know that, and it's James Bama, the guy who painted the Frankenstein, Aurora Monster Kit box and all those Doc Savage covers and all this stuff. One of the best paperback painters of all time, cover painters. He got a perk out of being in RetroFan. How cool! Now, but the readers like that. So I'm finding by doing this that there are some people who appreciate that, and Weirdos itself, also just has this pop culture, kitschy, really cool, appeal out there. So we'll make sure you get my email address and contact me.
I'll put you guys together for
Please
sure.
Do. That sounds good.
If I can
Bill,
chime in, that's exactly how we take pitches at TwoMorrows. You just did it beautifully. You talked to the editor. We're not so big place where you have to send manuscripts and wait for 6 months to get them reviewed. And so if anybody is interested, I know you guys are all freelance writers, and if you're interested in pitching stuff, just go to our website and there's a link to contact the editors directly. Make sure you know what you're pitching. Make sure you know about the subject that you're pitching. Michael was talking about that. but that's the nice thing about small niche publications. There's not this huge bureaucracy to go through to get published. We also don't pay a fortune for your hard work, but we do pay something, and it gets you some bylines that can lead to even better work.
Mhm.
And with all of our publications, I have to add too that the layout, the design is really nice. We've got some really talented people who put the magazines together artistically, and yeah, they're always pleasant to look at.
We were talking about pop culture and comic books particularly, but TwoMorrows also publishes a magazine devoted entirely to Lego. So it's a pop culture thing, but it's kind of not the pop culture thing you might think from a publisher like TwoMorrows. John, is that a really successful publication for you?
It has been, yeah. Well, Lego fandom, if you want to call it that. The magazine's geared not toward little kids that buy a set at Target and put it together, but toward adult builders who use their vast collections of assorted Lego bricks to make original creations. And so it's really high level building. It's adults, sharing tricks and tips with other adults of how they do things. Because like the hardest thing to do with square Lego bricks is to make a sphere, of course. And the even harder thing to do is make a sphere without the little Lego bumps on the outside. I could not do either of those things to save my life, but I know how they're done just from the magazine. And that's just a simple example of the techniques these guys and gals share with each other. It's also got a nice international reach. We've got people and contributors from all over the world in there because Lego is such a universal brand. So if any of you guys are Lego enthusiasts, that's a great one to pitch to. But again, you go straight to the editor and say, I've got an idea for an article. What do you think of this? And that's, that's how we work. And it's nice and casual and friendly. And you sign an agreement if we're going to publish your work. And, we send you free copies when it's done and pay you a little bit of money for your work. And it's, we've been doing it for 28 years now, and it's our system works pretty well. So I know there's another guy down there, Dewey, who has done several books with us now, as well as contributing to Michael's magazine. That's a little different aspect of how you pitch those. Sometimes you pitch them, and sometimes if I know I've got a good person we've worked with before, I'll go to them and say, hey, we really need to do a book on so-and-so. Is that one you're interested in? And Dewey took the bait on, let's see, that was Marshall Rogers. Is that the one I came to you with? And was there another one? The Mike Grell book, that was you saying, I want to do a Mike Grell book, right?
I think it was a mutual thing.
Was it? Okay. All right. But again, there's a lot of give and take. And that's the nice thing about working with small publishers. So if I were pounding the pavement for freelance work, I would definitely get started going to small niche publishers and build up as good of a portfolio as I could off of that. And you might find that it's way more rewarding because that's the beauty of it. You get to do what you want to do, not necessarily what someone assigns you to do. So.
John, I appreciate that. And I will second the fact that you do make working with these editors and yourself and the magazines really, really easy. Michael is one of the nicest editors that I've ever dealt with, and one of the most professional as well. And I mean that sincerely. Is there anyone else who has some questions or some ideas that you might want to throw out to John or Michael while we have them? Anybody?
I have a question.
Sandra?
I'm not going to write this, but as you were talking about Route 66, first of all, I enjoyed listening to both of you. It's very educational.
Thank you.
But when you talked about Route 66, I remember that I was competing with a girlfriend who loved Route 66. And in the same time frame, I loved Adventures in Paradise. Gardner McKay. I'm not going to write that because I don't have enough information to do it. But do you ever take ideas and put out and say, anybody out there want to write about Gardner McKay and Adventures in Paradise? Okay, silly.
Well,
But-
no, that's actually
No,
kind of
that's
how
a
Michael
great
works
question.
with that, is like he'll have an idea, right, Michael? And you'll, it's like for a lot of the themed issues and back issue, it's like, here's the thing, who'd like to run with it? You do that quite commonly. And I
I
think you
do.
also, you solicit ideas from your readers that may eventually be assigned to somebody down the road. Somebody said, I'd sure like to see an article, as Sandra just said, about this particular subject. And you're like, gee, we haven't talked about that. Yeah, we'll do that later. So, I mean, it's not outside the realm of possibility.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I mean, case in point, just last year, somebody at the end of a letter of comment about an issue of Back Issue said, I really would like to see an issue about dinosaurs. And I'm thinking like, wow, that's cool. Well, this year, the November issue is dinosaurs. And there's a ton of, in our time frame, of wonderful comics and beautifully drawn comics by two people in particular, William Stout and Mark Schultz. It is the end of the day for me, excuse me. And normally I'm like that.
You're doing better than me, Michael.
Well, and after bragging about my cognitive abilities here, but I also get up real early. I think it was a farmer in another life, and I have long days. But but I just filed that information away, and I started to think about it, and I realized I started to look around and say, well, there are a ton of dinosaur comics, and so as you said, Don, I cast that net to the writers group, and it's a group of around 75 people who I send emails to. That I basically I protect everybody's privacy, so they're there through BCC, blind carbon copy, but nonetheless, I pitched the ideas out. And earlier, when we only had a handful of people, there was more of a direct exchange. When you get 75, and sometimes it's been close to 100 people in this group, you just never know. And since I do bring in new people from time to time, there have been a few that have worked and that haven't worked, excuse me, but most, like 90% of people who have written for me have just been wonderful, and it's just been a great experience for all concerned.
Well, speaking of that dinosaur issue, you very graciously gave me 2 assignments in that particular issue. One of them being Bill Stout, who, as you know, is my favorite. And actually, Bill joined us for our October TAF meeting last year to talk about horror literature and cinema. Because Bill Stout knows everything about everything. So I just appreciate that opportunity. That knocked it out of the park for me. That was a lot of fun. Does anyone else have any questions for, Hannah?
I have one. Have you ever done anything like Ultraman, Godzilla film?
Godzilla, yes. Ultraman, not yet. Godzilla, we covered in Back Issue. Quite a few years back, I did a big green issue. That was a theme. And so in that issue, you had the Hulk, and you had Green Lantern and Green Arrow, and you had Godzilla, because you don't get very much bigger and greener than he or it. I guess he is a he. But we did the Marvel Comics version of Godzilla, because this is a comic book magazine. A couple of years ago in RetroFan, we did a piece on Godzilla toys. And now in this dinosaurs issue we're talking about, there is another Godzilla article. This is about Godzilla being published at Dark Horse Comics throughout the 1990s, which was a revival of the concept. As far as an actual history of Godzilla, I think that would be a perfect piece for RetroFan. And the writer, and if that were to be you, would have to do some deep diving into the character's history and present a really compelling and interesting read, but still has to be presented. Even though I love the deep diving terminology, but it's not a scholarly publication. By the same token, it's not a quick breeze through either. It's somewhere in between, and we've managed to find this tone that sort of sticks one toe into those waters of historical presentation, but still does so with a joy there, that inner 10-year-old that first saw that Godzilla movie on a Saturday afternoon matinee at your local television station, that kind of thing. And John Morrow, I want to give him some props here on the title of RetroFan magazine. We had the hardest time 4 years ago when we were developing this magazine, just coming up with a title. And then John actually said to me, and I think I'm quoting you, John, you said, "I know you're not going to like this, but what about RetroFan?" And I thought, yes, I love that, because that really helped shape the tone, just with that one choice of words, because the presentation is still professional, but it sort of implies that at the heart of every one of these articles, no matter how well researched they may be, and no matter with which celebrities you're talking to, it's still the span. You might be a 40-year-old or a 60-year-old writer who is presenting this history, but beating in here needs to be that kid that got you excited about it in the first place.
Very often the writer is an integral part of the story, talking about their introduction to a character or how they met a particular celebrity or something like that. And it really brings the nostalgia aspect to the fore in a situation like that, I think. And it makes for an interesting read as well. Yeah, absolutely.
The retro fan, though, and when we were formulating the idea for the magazine and who was going to be in it and all that, and I was really serious about making sure we tried to find the best experts for each little area to have as regular columnists. So if we're cover monster movies, we want the best monster guy. If we're going to cover toys, we want the best toy person. And we did. We started out with 4, I guess, that we knew we really wanted, and then one of them turned us down, and we had to find somebody else that was that area of expertise. But that was so crucial that these columnists were fans of what they did. So they would not just write one article and be done. They could cover a whole slew of things. But the whole fan aspect, the only scary thing about that name is it almost implies fanzine, which these are not. And Michael has to. 2 of our regular contributors that have been there from day one, and I'm not going to name names, are notoriously bad at making deadlines. And that was our hesitation with them. This gentleman right here has made sure those 2 people have been the most dedicated to their deadlines they've probably ever been in their entire careers. And that's because there's a level of respect Michael commands with his contributors, and they don't want to disappoint him. They deliver their stuff on time. And I know he has to work hard, particularly with one of them, to wrangle some text to get in on time from time to time. But he's so organized and works so far ahead that if someone doesn't deliver on time, boom, pull in your article. We'll put it in when you finish it. And he has somebody else on deck that can fill the spot. So we're never left hanging. And that's a big thing too, because RetroFan and our Lego magazine both go through like Barnes and Noble and the big bookstore chains, whereas our other comics related things only go through comic book stores. You cannot miss deadlines in the bookstore market with your publication schedule. They leave them on the rack for 2 months and then they pull them off. If you show up 6 weeks late, they're going to pull it off in 2 weeks and you're not going to sell any copies. So that's for anybody out here writing, never ever miss a deadline. Be early if you can. Make people like Michael Eury smile and have total confidence in you, because that's what we did when we did that Captain Action book with Michael. I didn't really know Michael at that point. I just saw his manuscript. I thought, okay, sure. And it was such a good experience working with him that when we needed a full-time editor for a new magazine, he's the first person I thought of. And because I knew that initial experience working with him was solid. It was so good. And, one of the smartest decisions I ever made was calling him up about Back Issue Magazine.
Wow. Well, thank you.
It's been a delight working with him. I don't think we've ever had a cross word, have we?
No.
And-
He makes his writers
Yeah.
work better. And I say that from personal
Right.
experience.
Absolutely.
much.
I
Thank
happen
you.
to like deadlines. I guess I'm one of those rare people. I really enjoy deadlines because I have ADD. So to have that deadline really helps me keep focused. And I like to get it in like at least a week early so that, okay, I can relax now.
Wow.
Then if there's anything that needs changing, I still have plenty of time to fix it. Because I
Well,
expect that.
that's wonderful. I'm glad. Deadlines are important.
Yeah.
They really they give you that goalpost.
They really do.
And I've got a couple of writers too that that are among some of my best that I just cannot commit to any longer
Mhm.
because I've been burned too many times.
Yeah.
And I'm a 3 strikes person, so it's either third time is a charm or 3 strikes and you're out.
You're out.
And however, if that person is really good at what they do, and just I did one person in particular, and I'm obviously not going to mention a name, but it's just has a hard time finishing. And the best advice I ever got was to go way back to the embryonic stages of my career when I was starting as a reporter, so to speak, for Amazing Heroes. I interviewed a guy who happened to live in the community that I had settled in. His name was David Michelini. At the time, he was writing Spider-Man. This was 1986, 87. And so, I interviewed Dave, and he told me, he said, sometimes you can go back and keep working that script, but you've got to turn it in. So, and this was 1987 think. So he said, you got to put it in the FedEx envelope and send it on. So again, that was 1987 FedEx envelope, there it goes. But I absorbed that and I realized that, okay, yeah, sometimes it's got to go down the hall or down the chute, whatever, and you've got to finish. And one of the toughest things I ever did, we're talking about writers tonight, just a very quick aside, as a comic book editor, that also means I work with artists. Artists often do not share the same discipline that most of us writers do. And we're creative spirits too. We're all creative artists. We just use words. They use pictures of different types. We paint a different type of picture. But sometimes you do have the artiste, the guy or gal who, just doesn't get it when it comes to the fact that you must finish this and turn it in because there are people waiting to publish this. And, it's, thank goodness they're not farmers. We would all have died of starvation because they couldn't deliver the crops. That was one of the frustrating things. And I am a nice guy at my core. I just, there's enough meanness and animosity and negativity out there.
Right.
And believe you me, in this cynical society, I have to, sometimes, defibrillate myself with a smile just to get out there and do it. Especially on a day like this, after that horrible news from yesterday and those poor children in Texas. I mean, you just go, Lord, when is this stuff going to end? When is this craziness going to end? And I just have to remind myself, I cannot succumb to the negativity because I've got readers, I've got writers who depend upon me to be upbeat. I've got a wife and a family and an aging father-in-law and a brother and just people I encounter at Planet Fitness or the grocery store. I went to the grocery store today. It's, I'm 64. I go to Publix on Wednesday. Why? Wisdom Wednesday, 5% off. and they love me there. And it's not, I'm no different than anybody else, but I treat them with respect. So I just smile and we talk. And, and then I witness people in line in front of or behind me, and it's like, and they're biting their heads off. That person's just trying to sell you your produce and your milk. Why do you need to take it out on them? They didn't give you a bad day. I have another Superman experience. Can I share it real quick? Because it ties into this. I interviewed an actor named Brandon Routh. he played Superman in the movie Superman Returns. And he also was in this TV show that just is now ending DC's Legends of Tomorrow. This was at the Yes, he played the Atom. So this was at the Superman celebration in Metropolis, Illinois, a few years. And about a year and a half, 2 years ago, we published this interview on Back Issue. But a charming, handsome guy, the epitome really of Superman. And he basically took that microphone and talked to the audience. And he said, when you encounter somebody who is meaner or mean or just has a bad aura about them, just remember that something happened to make them that way, or they might just be having a bad day. And just do your best to return whatever they're giving you with kindness. And, wow, that was Superman. But it's really not that hard when you think about it. And so I appreciate everything that you guys have said about me and working with me. It's just, I treat you how I want to be treated, with mutual respect. And I dare say that unfortunately it's something that our society might need some fine tuning with. But man, if I give in and you give in, then that's two more sourpusses that are just feeding the negative beast. And I don't want to do it. I'm not going to do it.
Exactly. None of us do. This has been one of our longer meetings and one of our most interesting. Before we bail, does anyone have one final question for Michael or for John? Nancy?
I do.
Pitcher?
Been waiting.
Yes, I'm sorry,
I
Nancy.
just want to know, has anybody heard of this magazine?
Yes.
Oh yeah, Badger.
Have you covered?
Look at my name. I wish I collected magazines. I'm in my 60s. I remember when they were 25 cents. But after I met my husband, every time we went near a comic book store, we looked. And we have volumes 1 through 70. It's Capital Comics. Are they in business?
They're long gone.
Is this golden age, Michael, or is
Well,
this?
no, that's the
83. 83.
Okay.
This is number
The
one.
Badger was, I read it.
Very gritty.
I loved it. Yes, it was one of this wave of 80s anti-heroes.
Right.
And the thing about the Badger, it's written by Mike Bern, and it's what we call a creator-owned concept, which means that the writer and sometimes the writer-artist team own the property, so they have more control over what to do with it. They don't have to kowtow. Yeah, Jeffrey Butler, he was the artist. And we did cover it in Back Issue, but long story short, Norbert Sykes, that's the guy's name, the guy behind the mask. He was, he suffered from post-traumatic stress he was a Vietnam vet. He was, he was sort of like the movie Network, the character, I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore. But he put on a costume and he would go out and beat up all the people that were litter bugs, that they spat on the sidewalk, all the kind of stuff. They park in the handicap spot. You see it and you go like, well, you shouldn't do that. Well, if the Badger's around, he's going to kick your butt. And it was, this was like during the Dirty Harry era, and Reagan in the White House. And, he was kind of the Death Valley days, tough talking president in a way with that soft voice, but still. It was perfect for its time. I loved that comic back then.
And Mike Rumble has one concluding question. Mike?
And the reason why you guys can't see me is not because I'm away from home and using a computer that our own Mark Cantrell gifted to me that doesn't have a camera, but in fact in the Batcave drinking coffee. This is kind of something, I guess, for all three of you, John, Michael, and Dewey. I've kind of become, in the last couple of years, discovered my love for comics again, but I'm kind of around more of the ones that are written right around this time. How do you guys look at how characters are written now, like how dark they are now versus how they were written, maybe 15, 20 years ago?
That's a good question. Michael? I don't read modern comics very much at all. I'm more of a golden age, silver age kind of guy. So I'll throw that to John and Michael and Dewey. But it's an interesting question. But it also goes to the constant evolution of comics as an art form.
Yeah, 1987 was when what The Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen came out, right? Or 87, 88.
Yeah.
And that was the new thing. That and Miracle Man was the other one that treat comics as if these superheroes were real life creatures, and what really would happen in a realistic situation if they existed. And that was a very novel twist then, that made predominantly by a writer named Alan Moore. And that was great. And that was my jumping off point for comics. That's when I stopped reading comics. After those, I thought, wow, how much further could comics go than this? And little did I know. And I sold most of my comics then. So had no idea we'd be where we are today doing this. But and then in 93, when my favorite comic artist died, and I hadn't seen a comic book in 6 years or whatever, I went into a comic book store. And I was like looking at the new comics for the first time in 6 years. And I was like, man, these are definitely not what I grew up on. Everything had taken those initial dark stories and decided that was a new thing to do. And everybody copied it. And the entire focus of comics turned into this very dark, violent, negative, over-sexualized, almost cliche kind of thing, to the point where I had no love at all for these new comics that were coming out. So I started seeking out the old ones again and rebuying the ones that I had sold when I got out of comics. So, and that's where, what we publish is nostalgia. I mean, you get right down to it. Michael's magazine is about old comics. It's not about what's going on in comics today. I don't think you'll ever do that, right? You're just now kind of dipping your toe in the 1990s comics.
Yeah.
Back Issue magazine.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's about as far as I want to go forward. Maybe the very early 2000s, which is kind of, it's 20 years ago now. That's old now for a lot of people. But yeah, I actually read some new comics up until about the past year, and actually even very recently. And I finally decided, okay, with my budget, I would rather be able to buy, which I just did, and it comes in the mail tomorrow. Thanks to in-stock trades, I get the Incredible Hulk Omnibus, which has it's like an 800-page hardcover, which has all the early Hulk stories of the first 6 years in one volume. And it weighs like 20 pounds. And I read these things in bed, and I fall asleep, and they smack me in the face, wake me up. Then I get up and read a few more pages, and then I repeat the process until I finally say, okay, I got to put it down and go to sleep. But I had to give up on new comics, but I really try not to disparage them, because I know I'm not the demographic. And I know that they are telling stories in a certain manner that they believe, or the publishers believe, is what the market wants today. So I don't want to be the old guy who says, well, in my day, or if they would be selling better if they would only do this. I'm happy to see that they're selling better. They might. Just let you run it. They might, but if I ran it, they would be happier, and fewer people would be throwing people off the rooftops. But nonetheless, I just like a happy ending in stories. I like to have. I like to see people stumble in stories, and I like to see them pick themselves up and learn something from it. You mentioned Watchmen. Now, a few years back, we interviewed Dave Gibbons, who was the artist of Watchmen with writer Alan Moore. And Dave more or less kind of gave almost an apology for Watchmen, not for the work, which is a wonderful work in itself, but it did what they called the deconstruction of, you love the air quotes, of superheroes. They really just, stripped it down and made these people real and utterly flawed. And the weight of the world was literally upon them with, Armageddon, nuclear Armageddon ticking, the clock was ticking, all of that. But what happened and what Dave was apologizing for was not for the work, but for how everybody jumped on that bandwagon. He and Alan Moore created something that they intended to be a graphic novel, to be on your bookshelf, and maybe be developed into a movie and TV show, as it has been. but they did not expect for so many people to try to emulate that to the point of where, you know, it used to be when you go in a comic shop, you'd have all the all ages stuff and then a small little section for adults. Now it's all the darker stuff. And over in the corner, you little kids, there's your, you know, couple of comics that
There's your
you know,
Archies.
they're your Archies, and
But even
then your
Archie's
Batman
getting
for
weird
little
these
kids.
days.
Well, it is. So, yeah, again, it's just not my cup of tea. But it's you know, if there are people going into the shops buying us stuff and keeping Hawkeye and Batgirl alive, then that's great. I never would have thought when I was a kid that somebody could win an Oscar for playing the Joker, you know, I mean, or that Black Panther would be nominated for Best Picture of the Year. I mean, this stuff has evolved into something that is just well beyond what anybody, including the great visionary Jack Kirby, could have ever imagined. And so, yeah, it's dark, too dark for my taste. I'll read the old stuff, but I'm still glad it's out there.
This is a great spot. Does anyone have, and Michael, at the end of our meetings, we usually go around if someone has some good news to share. I don't know if anyone does this evening. Does anyone have anything cool, real quick? Any sales or anything? Okay, that's fine. This has been awesome. I can't thank Michael, you and John. I can't thank you enough for joining us this evening. This has been a wonderful conversation, a really interesting and fascinating discussion about writing and freelance writing in particular. I can't thank you enough. It's just been wonderful, and we really appreciate you joining us tonight. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for having me.